Chapter 3. It seemed to Igraine that she'd been riding forever in the rain. The journey to Londinium was like a journey from the end of the world. She had travelled but little before, except long ago, from Avalon to Tintagel. She contrasted the frightened, despairing child of that first journey with herself today. Now she rode at Gorloy's side, and he went to some trouble to tell her something of the lands they passed through, and she laughed and teased him, and at night, in their tent, she went willingly to his bed. Now and again she missed Morgaine, wondering how the child would be faring. Would she cry at night for her mother? Would she eat at Morgause's bidding? But it was pleasant to be free again, riding in this great company of men, conscious of their admiring looks and their deference. None of them would dare to approach Gorloy's lady, except with an admiring glance. She was a girl again, but not now, frightened and shrinking from the strange man who was her husband, and whom she must somehow manage to please. She was a girl again without the childish awkwardness of her real girlhood, and she was enjoying it. She did not even mind the ceaseless rain that obscured the distant hills, so that they rode within a little circle of mist. We could lose our way in this mist, wander off into the realms of faerie, and never return at all to this world, where the dying Ambrosius and the ambitious Uther planned for the salvation of Britain from the wild savages. Britain could sink like Rome under the barbarians, and we need never know or care. "Are you weary, Igraine?" Gorloy's voice was gentle and concerned. Really, he was not the ogre he had seemed during those first terrifying days 4 years ago. Now he was only an aging man, grey in his hair and beard, though he shaved himself carefully in Roman fashion, scarred from years of fighting, and touchingly eager to please her. Perhaps if she had not been so frightened and rebellious in those days, she might have seen that he was eager to please her then, too. He had not been cruel to her, or if he was, it was only that he seemed to know so little of women's bodies and how to use them. Now it seemed only clumsiness, not cruelty, and if she told him he hurt her, he would caress her more gently. The younger Igraine had thought it inevitable, the hurt and the terror. Now she knew better. She smiled at him now, gaily, and said, "No, not at all. I feel I could go on riding forever. But with so much mist, how do you know that we will not lose our way and never come to Londinium at all?" "You need not fear that," he said gravely. "My guides are very good, and they know every inch of the road. And before nightfall we will come to the old Roman town, which leads into the very heart of the city, so we will sleep this night under a roof and in a proper bed." "I shall be glad to sleep again in a proper bed," said Igraine demurely, and saw, as she had known she would see, the sudden heat rising in his face and eyes. But he turned his face away from her. It was almost as if he was afraid of her, and Igraine, having just discovered this power, delighted in it. She rode on at his side, reflecting on the sudden kindness she felt for Gorloy, a kindness mixed with regret, as if he had become dear to her only now when she knew she must lose him. One way or another, she knew her days at his side were numbered, and she remembered how she had first known that he would die. She had had his messenger warning her to prepare for his coming. He had sent one of his men, with suspicious eyes which peered everywhere, telling Igraine without words that if this man had had a young wife, he would have come home without warning, hoping to surprise some misconduct or extravagance. Igraine, knowing herself guiltless, her steward competent, her kitchen in order, had ignored the prying stares and bade the man welcome. Let him question her servants if he would find that, except for her sister and the Lord Merlin, she had received no guests at Tintagel. When the messenger had gone, Igraine turned to cross the courtyard, had stopped, a shadow falling across her in full sunlight, stricken with causeless fear. And in that moment she saw Gorloy, wondering where was his hoss, his entourage. Horse, 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 horse! That happens sometimes. Wondering where was his horse, his entourage. He looked thinner and older, so that for a moment she hardly knew him, and his face was drawn and haggard. There was a sword cut on his cheek which she did not remember. "My husband!" she cried. "Gorlois!" And then, stricken by the unspeakable grief in his face, she had forgotten her fear of him, and the years of resentment, rushed toward him and spoken as she would have spoken to her child. "Oh, my dear, what has happened to you? What has brought you here like this, alone, unarmed? Are you ill? Are you—" And then she stopped, her voice dying away among the echoes, for there was no one there, only the fitful light from the clouds and sea and shadows, and the echo of her own voice. She tried, all the rest of that day, to reassure herself that it was only a sending, like the one that had warned her of Vivian's coming. But she knew better. Gorlois had not the sight, would not have used it or believed in it if he had had it. What she had seen, and she knew it even though she had never seen anything like it before, was her husband's fetch, his double, and the shadow and precursor of his death. And when at last he arrived, whole and sound, she had tried to shrug away the memory, had told herself that it was only a trick of the light that made her see, behind him, the shadow she had seen, with the sword cut on his face and the unspeakable grief in his eyes. For Gorlois now was neither wounded nor disheartened. On the contrary, he was in high good humor, bringing gifts for her, and even a string of little coral beads for Morgane. He had looked in the sacks of his Saxon plunder, and given Morgause a red cloak. No doubt it belonged to some Saxon strumpet, some camp follower, or even one of the screaming swordswomen who fight alongside their men. "Half naked on the field of war," he said, laughing and chucking the girl under the chin. "So it is just as well it should be worn by a decent British maiden. The color becomes you, little sister. When you have grown a bit, you'll be as pretty as my wife." Morgause had simpered and giggled and tossed her head, posing in the new cloak. And later Gorlois had said sharply, as he and Igraine were making themselves ready for bed, Morgane, howling, had been banished to Morgause's room. "We must have that girl married as soon as can be arranged, Igraine. She is a puppy bitch with eyes hot for anything in the shape of a man. Did you see how she cast her eyes not only on me, but on my younger soldiers? I will not have such a one disgracing my family, nor influencing my daughter." Igraine had given him a soft answer. She could not forget that she had seen Gorlois' death, and she would not argue with a condemned man, and she too had been annoyed by Morgause's behavior. So Gorlois is to die. Well, it takes not much prophecy to foresee that a man of 45, who has been fighting Saxons much of his life, will not live to see his little children grown. I shall not let it make me believe all the rest of the nonsense she spoke to me. Or I shall be expecting Gorlois... I shall not let it make me believe all the rest of the nonsense she spoke to me, or I shall be expecting Gorlois to take me to Londinium. But the next day, as they lingered over breaking their fast, and she was mending a great rent in his best tunic, he spoke bluntly. "Did you not wonder what brought me here so suddenly, Igraine?" After the night passed, she had the confidence to smile into his eyes. "Should I question fortune which has brought my husband home after a year's absence? I hope it means that the Saxon shores are free and in British hands again." He nodded absently and smiled. Then the smile was gone. "Ambrosius Aurelianus is dying. The old eagle will soon be gone, and there is no hatchling to fly in his place. It is like the legions going again. He has been High King for all my days, and a good king for those of us who still hoped, as I did, for the return of Rome one day. Now I know that day will never come. The kings of Britain, from near and far, have been summoned to gather in Londinium to choose their High King and war leader, and I too must go. It was a long journey to stay so little time, for I must be off again within 3 days, but I would not come so near without seeing you and the child. It will be a great gathering, Igraine, and many of the dukes and kings will bring their ladies. Would you like to come with me?" "To Londinium?" "Yes, if you will travel so far," he said, "and if you can bring yourself to leave that child. I do not know why you should not. Morgane is healthy and sound, and there are enough women here to look after a dozen like her. And if I have managed to get you with child again—" He met her eyes in a smile she could hardly have imagined on his face. "It will not yet hinder you in writing." There was a tenderness she had never guessed in his voice as he added, "I would rather not be parted from you again for a little while at least. Will you come, my wife?" somehow you must contrive to come to Londinium with him. Vivian had said it, and now Gorlois had made it unnecessary to even to ask. Igraine had a sudden feeling of panic, as if she were on a runaway horse. She picked up a cup of beer and sipped at it to cover her confusion. Certainly, I will come if you wish it. 2 days later they were on the road, riding eastward to Londinium, and the encampment of Uther Pendragon and the dying Ambrosius for the choosing of a high king. In mid-afternoon they came to the Roman road, and could ride more swiftly, and late that day they could see the outskirts of Londinium, and smell the tidal river that washed its shores. Igraine had never guessed so many houses could be gathered together in one place, and for a moment she felt, after the chill spaces of the southern moors, that she could not breathe, that the houses were closing in on her. She rode, as if in a trance, feeling that the stone streets and walls cut her off from air and light and life itself. How could people live behind walls this way? We will sleep this night at the home of one of my soldiers, who has a house in the city, Gorlois said, and tomorrow we will present ourselves at the court of Ambrosius. She asked him that night, seated before the fire. What luxury, she thought, a fire this near to midsummer. Who, think you, will be the next High King? What can it matter to a woman who rules the land? She smiled sidelong at him. She had taken down her hair for the night, and she could feel him warming to the smile. Even though I am a woman, Gorlois, I must live in this land, and I would like to know what manner of man my husband must follow in peace and war. Peace! There will be no peace in my lifetime, at least, Gorlois said. Not with all those wild folk coming to our rich shores. We must gather all our strength to defend ourselves. And there are many who would like to wear the mantle of Ambrosius and lead us in war. Lot of Orkney, for instance. A harsh man, but reliable, a strong leader, good at battle strategy. Still unmarried, though, no dynasty. He's young for a high king, but ambitious. Never knew a man of that age so ambitious. And Urian of North Wales, no problems with dynasty, he already has sons. But the man has no imagination, wants to do everything as it's always been done, says that it worked once and it will work again, and I suspect he's no good Christian. Which would be your choice? Igraine asked. He sighed. Neither, he said. I have followed Ambrosius all my life, and I will follow the man Ambrosius has chosen. It's a matter of honor, and Uther is Ambrosius's man. It's as simple as that, not that I like Uther. He's a lecherous man with a dozen bastards, and no woman's safe around him. He goes to mass because the army does, and because it's the thing to do. I'd rather he was an honest pagan than a Christian for the benefits he can get from it. Yet you will support him. Oh, yes, he is soldier enough for a Caesar. The men will follow him through hell if they have to. He spares no effort to be popular with the army. You know, the kind of thing, going around the camp and munching on their rations to make sure they're fit to eat, spending a day when he could be taking his ease in going to the quartermaster's to get a discharge for an old toothless veteran. Sleeping in the field with the men before a battle. The men would die for him, and they do. And he has both brains and imagination. He managed to make peace with the treaty troops and get them to fight alongside us last fall. He thinks a little too much like a Saxon for me. He knows how their minds work. Yes, I'll support him, but that doesn't mean I like the man. Igraine, listening, thought that Gorlois had revealed more of himself than of the other candidates for High King. More of himself than of the other candidates for High King. She said at last, Have you never thought, you are Duke of Cornwall, and Ambrosius values you. Could you be chosen as High King? Believe me, Igraine, I want no crown. Have you a wish to be queen? I would not refuse it, she said, recalling the Merlin's prophecy. You say that because you are too young to know what it means, Gorlois said with a smile. Would you truly like to rule a kingdom as you must rule over your servants at Tintagel, at everyone's beck and call? There was a time when I was younger, but I do not want to spend the rest of my lifetime at war. Ambrosius gave me Tintagel years ago, Igraine. Until 4 years ago I had not spent enough time there to bring home a wife. I will defend these shores as long as I can hold a sword, but I want a son to play with my daughter, and some time to spend in peace, fishing from the rocks, hunting, and sitting in the sun watching the peasant folk bring in their crops, and time perhaps to make peace with my God, so that he may forgive me for all the things I've had to do in the life as a soldier. But even when there is peace in the land, the High King has no peace. For when the enemies leave our shore, why then his friends begin to fight, if only for his favor. No, there will be no crown for me, and when you are my age, you'll be glad of it. Igraine felt a pricking behind her eyes as Gorlois spoke. So this harsh soldier, the somber man she had feared, now felt enough at ease with her to reveal something of his wishes. With all her heart she wished that he might have his last few years in the sun as he wished, his children playing about him, but even here, in the flickering of the fire, she thought she could see the ominous shadow of the doom that followed him. It is my imagination. I have let the words of the Merlin make me imagine foolish things, she told herself, and when Gorlois yawned and stretched, saying that he was weary from riding, she went quickly to help him take off his clothes. This is a long chapter. It's a good one, though. I'm going to pause there, and I'll continue in a bit. It's a long chapter, and I'm already thirsty.